I am excited to discuss Africa and the Middle East because Africa is often overlooked as a business opportunity for some reason. People think, um, I don't know, I often come across ideas that, it's Europe, North America, South America, and Asia that are these big markets, but Africa's got a massively rising population that's young and exciting and becoming very tech savvy. Nigeria will have some of the youngest populations in the world by 2050 with 200 million people. And at the current rate, most of them are under 18. So that's a young, vibrant, working population that will be eager to be a participant in the world. Unfortunately, through history and challenge, political strife, we've seen a continent that has just not really emerged as we would expect it to be. Unfortunately, it still makes up for less than 3% of global trade, and when I first checked it, it was 1% 10, 15 years ago. So it really hasn't grown the way it should have. And for some of these reasons, it comes from, for example, how Africa is treated. Its history being, of course, brutal and insanely amongst each other. The colonization created these problems, but of course, Africa was the richest of the world, like China was several hundred years ago, hundreds of years ago, prior to the colonization. So Africa has a rich history that's vibrant, diverse, and was wealthy for many years. But now it's, of course, still struggling. So let's look at a few issues that I think are significant examples. When the European Union created its central agricultural policy, it was to protect farmers and food security on the continent. What it became was an overproduction and subsidization of food. What to do with that food became a new question. European people just didn't want to throw it away, so why not help and just give it to African nations? The idea of that was dangerous because it was food dumping. And a lot of nations that were already weakened by climate issues and droughts and famine didn't need this issue to further bankrupt farmers and make it impossible for their own agricultural market to thrive. And in response to that issue happening, because that was a result of it, was drought, famine, and then all of a sudden a dumping. The United States comes in and thinks we need to help because there's this problem, and so we give food away, and that result further exacerbates this issue. So the way we treated this situation and others is an example of what has made the problems worse, and needlessly so. The World Bank and the IMF, having come in with programs that made projects more expensive or did not limit inflation, created other issues on the continent that suppressed growth and saw that projects were not useful or helpful to the markets that they were intended for. And that's sad, more than sad, because it really damaged these markets. And then furthermore, we have other issues where, for example, Tom's shoes, buy a pair, give a pair. And they're showing these pictures of people with shoes that never really cared about shoes to begin with. And in the Netflix series, I can't remember the TV show, the guy that they had on his show alludes this to poverty porn, that we're here to help you because it makes us feel good even if we're not really helping you. And that's kind of how I see the whole situation unfolding, is we're hurting markets by thinking we're helping them, by making their situations worse, and that we have to come in to make that better because we forgot that we were the reason why it made it worse. Better to do it in a more safe way to help people that understands the consequences and just making it potentially worse. And that's where, you see other things happen on the African continent that's struggling and troublesome. We start seeing political issues after the emergence of countries out of colonization. You start seeing you see the how do I say, the Africa has an unfortunate level of dictators and an extremely wealthy small population with an extremely poor population, large poor population. So economic disparity is massive on the continent. And that's the stifling factor that we ultimately face, is that those are people who, all those millions of people who have less access to education, less access to food, and less access to opportunities, are those fewer people we have in the world that can be great participants in a massive planet where a lot of us want to grow and seek new opportunities. So there's a whole billion people right here that could be a great opportunity. So, and when you look at blue ocean strategy management opportunities, you start seeing that those that are where competition doesn't exist, there could also be greater opportunities to compete. And so these are countries that I would not underscore for their opportunity to grow and actually do business. So that's what I look at. Unfortunately, because of this lack of investment and the poor decisions we've made, many countries in African continent have looked towards China for investment, and that remarkable investments are happening there. The question is, how will it play out for the countries that are there? How will it play out for the geopolitical sphere for China, and how will that affect other nations such as the United States and European nations? How will they be impacted by this change of investment? So that's Africa in its whole nutshell. It's very broad, I understand, but the idea that Africa is not a nation to do business is sad. Do not think that. There's so much there. Mobile banking ideas came out of Africa. For example, when kids from South Africa were going from their villages to work in the big cities, would have to physically go home to the villages to bring home cash. With the advent of these cell phones, Blackberries, for example, they were able to do mobile banking and send money to their parents in their small villages without having to go home so quickly or so often. So don't underestimate some of the cool stuff happening, and they will continue to play a role. I'm not going to talk too much about the African Union. It lacks a lot of might and power, partly because the integration elements are not there, and partly because of resource-rich nations are currently still divisive. You'll see within the Congo region, or Sudan, Sudan, you'll see that there's still huge issues internally within their North and their South Sudan. So that's one of the reasons why the Union still hasn't held itself up, is there's political instability. There are regional cooperatives that are pretty optimistic for me. You know, the Economic Community of West African States, the development of Southern African nations, hopefully will create better relations between nations such as Zimbabwe and South Africa. But political turmoil continues to push. We haven't seen the end of South Africa and their issues. We haven't seen the end of Sudan and their issues, and on and on. So be mindful, be reading about what's happening in Africa. They're a frontier of new opportunities, but also big problems if we don't address them. Many of the issues facing this continent is facing almost every continent, and that's unfortunate. Housing issues, urbanization, sanitization or sanitation issues such as like developments of pipelines and plumbing and access to electricity and clean water continue to be an issue in all sorts of areas and pockets of Africa, as you'll see it in parts of Southeast Asia, as well as you would sadly see, you know, housing an issue in the United States. Don't know what that is. Going to go on. Middle East and North Africa. Their relationship together between the Middle East and North Africa has been older than one could imagine because of the Ottoman Empire and the expansion of east to west. You'll be amazed to find that nations in North Africa were a foothold of power and wealth for many years, and not talk about Egypt in its thousands of years ago, or Mesopotamia in the Middle East. You will see that these countries held a lot of power and wealth up in the Middle Ages, or what we'd say the Dark Ages. A period of science and growth happened. So their relationship is close. And that's why you'll see the Arab Free Trade Agreement with Egypt, Morocco, and the Persian Gulf. They're just one of a relationship that's much older. Economic communities happening here, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey, because Turkey has been throttled out of the European Union's opportunities because of a number of reasons. Unfortunately, I don't want to go into a lot of those details. Just say their malign intent of both sides, particularly, has been unfortunate. Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey creating a relationship shows the elements of culture come into play, but also a history that's deeper than that, that goes long ways, and I think that's fascinating. I'm not going to talk about that. So, looking at the different markets that are emerging, looking at the different opportunities in Africa, the histories that are rich, diverse, and wealth and science for centuries. These histories do promulgate, or exist in the embodiments of the values and cultures of these countries. And their emergence back on the world stage or into the world stage will continue to be a huge player, particularly countries like Nigeria, for example, with its massive young population. So look at these opportunities. I see my world in 2050. You'll see a lot of emerging nations come about that are going to be key players in economic trade, and therein lie plenty of business opportunities. As an international marketer, you need to be assessing those.